In one of many disturbing discoveries to grace New York City streets this year, the slain body of 31-year-old Yazmeen Williams was found in a sleeping bag near some garbage cans in Manhattan's Nomad neighborhood in early July. She had succumbed to a single gunshot wound to the head, and her death was ruled a homicide. 3 days later, police responded to a call about a disturbance in the same area and encountered a throng of around 50 angry civilians who were swarming a 55-year-old wheelchair-bound man named Chad Irish. The furious crowd, which included several of Williams's family members and friends, could be seen punching Irish and ripping his shirt. According to reports, someone had identified Irish as a possible suspect in Williams's murder, sparking the heated confrontation that was going on when officers arrived at the scene. Investigators uncovered surveillance footage that appeared to show Irish dragging the young woman's body along a sidewalk toward the site where her remains were found. The accused killer was taken out of a housing project on a stretcher as irate bystanders shouted at him and continued trying to attack him. He was initially taken to the hospital while police continued their investigation, but is now in custody on a murder charge in connection with Williams' death. While the accused killer's suspected motive remains unclear, Irish and Williams were reportedly seen arguing on surveillance video shortly before the homicide. In the footage, Irish could be heard threatening to shoot Williams. In addition to the murder charge, he faces 1 count each of concealment of a human corpse and possession of a weapon. Irish previously faced a murder charge in 1994 for blowing up a house and killing his uncle. He's currently being detained at Rikers Island as he awaits his next scheduled court date in late July.
Yo! So, our winner from last week's Guess the Number giveaway on our YouTube video When Overestimating Yourself Goes Wrong is Meg, not Megan, 1966, with their guess of 2379, which was actually the closest to what I actually wrote, 2357. So congrats and thanks for participating, and congratulations on your new free shirt. So we'll be doing more of these moving forward. Be sure to drop a follow here on IG, subscribe to us on YouTube, and hit the bell button to be alerted on when the next giveaway is.
Number 15. Samaria Lopez. In a deadly act of violence that was captured on camera on June 11th, 22-year-old Jordan Walston was viciously stabbed to death during a fight with another woman outside the Port Authority bus terminal in New York City. Disturbing surveillance footage appeared to show the suspect, 22-year-old Samaria Lopez, lunging at Walston during a fight on a midtown Manhattan sidewalk shortly after 10 p.m. According to prosecutors, the accused killer stabbed the victim twice in the aorta and continued to laugh at and taunt her as she took her final breaths. By the time law enforcement arrived at the scene, Lopez had fled. She attempted to elude the authorities by changing her phone numbers and addresses, but she was arrested 3 days after the stabbing. The arraignment got off to a tense start, with family members of the victim and defendant being separated by court officers during a shouted match over seating. Things became even more heated when Lopez entered the courtroom with a sinister grin on her face and laughed while pleading not guilty, prompting a relative of Walston to call her some choice words. The upset family member continued making sarcastic comments about the defendant's cute smirk as she was dragged out of the courtroom by multiple officers. Another one of Walston's relatives snuck in a remark about how Lopez was going to suffer the same fate as Walston, even after the judge warned everyone that he was not going to tolerate disorder in his courtroom. Court officials ended up escorting both families out of the courtroom, and Lopez remains held without bail at Rikers Island as she awaits her next hearing, which is scheduled for late October. Number 14. Javontee Bryce. On a Monday night in late June, a 28-year-old Florida man named Javontee Bryce murdered 3 victims in less than an hour in Manatee County, including his own mother. According to deputies, Bryce fatally shot Titimaisha Scott in front of her boyfriend and daughters outside a Motel 6 in Bradenton before killing his cousin, Sequoia Starquez Jonquilla Bryce, and his ex-girlfriend's partner, 31-year-old Chanel Carter, in separate locations. He then fled the area in a vehicle and was killed several hours later during a shootout with deputies near the Georgia border in Hamilton County, roughly 240 miles from the murder scenes. Authorities believe Bryce was on his way to kill a fourth victim in Georgia at the time of his death. In the wake of the horrifying events of that night, the Bradenton Herald revealed that he had a history of mental health issues and domestic violence. According to court documents, the local police department filed a risk protection order against Bryce in 2021 to restrict his access to guns after determining that he would pose a significant risk to himself and others by having a firearm in his possession. The order expired in 2023 and was not renewed, which means that it was no longer in effect at the time of the murders. Following a previous incident involving a gun, Bryce had been hospitalized under Florida's Baker Act, which allows for the involuntary commitment of a mentally ill person who is resistant to treatment and poses a danger to themselves or others. He was eventually released, and the killings mark the latest tragic example of a person who desperately needs help slipping through the cracks of a system that is meant to prevent these types of situations. Number 13. Dwayne John Crichton. While responding to a report about horrific screams in a residential area at 2:30 a.m. on June 29th, police found 40-year-old Australian mother of three, Sarah Miles, beaten and unresponsive at her home in Casino, New South Wales. It took officers nearly an hour to head to the scene and even longer for paramedics to show up, at which point it was too late to save the woman's life. She died at the scene from severe head injuries, prompting the authorities to launch two investigations. One to find out why it took so long for law enforcement to respond to the neighbor's call, and another to identify and arrest the killer. Miles's partner, 31-year-old Dwayne John Crichton, was charged with her murder and remains held without bail as he awaits trial. Police have released few details about the circumstances leading up to Miles's death, which remains under investigation. The emergency call from Miles's neighbor was classified as a Level 3, which means that it was considered a low priority matter. As a result, law enforcement and other emergency responders did not rush to the scene despite being aware of the call. Once they decided to acknowledge the call at 2:25 in the morning, it took them just 2 minutes to arrive at Miles's home. The investigation into the slow response time is ongoing. Number 12. The murder of Martha Salcedo. 29-year-old Mexican TV presenter Martha Salcedo was mercilessly gunned down in front of her son and her assistant while walking to her SUV after leaving a circus in late June in the state of Huixquilucan. Two men approached Salcedo and ordered her to hand over her purse and keys. Instead of complying, she struggled with one of the suspects and was shot twice. Just days after Martha died from her injuries, her brother, 33-year-old soccer star Carlos Salcedo, was accused of orchestrating the murder by their own mother, Maria Hernandez, in a scathing social media post. Hernandez also accused Carlos's current wife, Andrea Navarro, of playing a role in the crime and claimed that the couple was trying to flee the country. Carlos became estranged from his family after divorcing his first wife, Ivana Seguenza, in 2018. The former couple remained entangled in an acrimonious child custody battle to this day amid the continued tensions between Carlos and his father, mother, and sister. According to news reports, the feud was fueled by Hernandez's disapproval over her son's relationship with Navarro, which led to a shouting match in the courtroom on at least one occasion. The ongoing dispute was further strained when Carlos sued his father, who was acting as his manager at the time, for mismanagement. Carlos and Martha reportedly worked out their differences in 2020, but the situation remained unstable enough for Carlos to request a transfer to another soccer team outside Mexico due to family problems, shortly before Martha's murder. Following his mother's accusatory social media post, he posted an Instagram story thanking his fans and followers for their support, although he failed to specify whether he was referring to their support while he griefs in the aftermath of his sister's murder or support for his innocence in light of the shocking allegation that he had something to do with the crime. Number 11. Zachary Mowel. On the evening of July 1st, a Tennessee woman named Tessa Trotter was stabbed, beaten, doused with gasoline and set ablaze by a man who was later identified by law enforcement as her husband, 28-year-old Zachary Mowel. A pair of Good Samaritans noticed smoke coming from the woman's home as they were passing by and sprang into action to help. They called 911 and firefighters rushed to the scene. Thanks to the quick-thinking response of both the kind-hearted strangers and diligent emergency responders, Trotter survived, but she faces a long road to recovery. She sustained third-degree burns and suffered 9 stab wounds and a collapsed lung. All her ribs were broken. She was punched in the face over 30 times, and the attack left her paralyzed from the waist down. Emergency responders were still at the scene when Mowel approached an officer and confessed to committing the nearly fatal assault. He's currently being held at the Dixon County Jail on suspicion of attempted first-degree murder, aggravated arson, aggravated assault, and domestic assault, with bail set at $765,000. Trotter's twin sister Tori told local station WKRN that Mowel had a history of being emotionally abusive but had never physically harmed Tessa prior to the attack. Tori believes he attacked Tessa because she was planning on divorcing him and had contacted a lawyer, but for now, most of the details of the case are being kept under wraps and the outcome remains to be seen. Number 10. Carol Hopkinson. On a Sunday morning in early July, emergency responders were summoned to a home in the Adelaide suburb of Tampering, where they found the murdered body of 60-year-old psychiatric nurse Simon Hopkinson. Police were called to the scene by Simon's wife, 58-year-old Carol Hopkinson, who had also worked as a mental health nurse for 20 years and seemed like an unlikely candidate for having committed the crime. But all signs point toward her being responsible for her husband's death, according to prosecutors, and she is now being detained on a murder charge. Horrified neighbors reported seeing Carol nonchalantly walking around outside in her pink pajamas with both of her hands bandaged. Before she was placed into custody and taken to jail, a judge denied bail, which means that she'll remain in custody at least until her next court hearing in November. For the time being, authorities have revealed few details about the case, leaving Simon's cause of death and the circumstances leading up to his murder a mystery. Number 9. Troy Armstrong. 36-year-old Troy Armstrong was in jail for a pending murder case in Molong, New South Wales, Australia, in June of 2024, when he was found dead in his jail cell. He passed away just days before the 1-year anniversary of the deadly car wreck that killed his estranged wife, Christy Armstrong, who died instantly. According to police, Troy slammed his ute into Christy's vehicle at 87 miles per hour after an argument outside their children's school. Just 2 weeks prior to the crash, Christy had served him with a protective order banning him from harassing and threatening behavior. Troy sustained major brain and spinal injuries which left him unable to walk or use the bathroom on his own. The 2 daughters he and Christy shared were in Christy's vehicle at the time of the crash and survived with minor injuries. He was charged with murder, 2 counts of attempted murder, and 3 counts of breaching apprehended violence orders. At the time of his death, Troy had yet to enter a plea and was awaiting a hearing to determine whether the case would go to trial. In the wake of the tragic saga, Christy's loved ones and friends criticized the police for not taking her domestic violence reports seriously, leaving them to wonder if she might still be alive if her complaints had generated a more urgent response from the authorities. Number 8. Yue Zhou. In early June, a 42-year-old masseuse named Yue Zhou was arrested for trying to hire a hitman to kill her lover's wife and adult daughter. The Chinese national, who's based in Flushing, Queens, but works at spas across the United States, is accused of offering cryptocurrency, cash, and intimate favors in exchange for getting the job done. Little did she know the hitman website was fictitious, and federal authorities were alerted to her sinister intentions. The case dates back to 2019, when prosecutors claimed that Zhou sought the hitman services using the alias Big Tree. Her arrest and news of her alleged crimes finally came in July of 2024 after she was nabbed in Virginia on a federal murder-for-hire charge. When Zhou first began inquiring about hiring a hitman, she was having an affair with the husband of one of her intended victims. She caught feelings for the man and started wanting more from him than the constraints of his marriage allowed. Hoping to replace her lover's wife, she went to the extreme of seeking to eliminate the victims from the picture. According to prosecutors, Zhou made a $5,000 Bitcoin payment to the phony website and another $5,000 Bitcoin payment to a middleman. She then proceeded to describe what her paramour's wife looked like and provided the woman's address, work schedule, and information about the best time to carry out the murder. Zhou also shared details about her boyfriend's daughter, whom she also wanted out of the way. When she eventually began to suspect that the website was fake, she reportedly made disturbing threats of physical violence against the administrator and their family. In December of 2019, roughly 9 months after Zhou first entertained the idea of having the victims killed, she allegedly contacted her boyfriend's daughter and threatened to chop her up into 100 pieces. She also contacted the woman's neighbor in early 2021 and offered $10,000 in intimate favors in exchange for carrying out the hit. Following her recent arrest, Zhou pleaded not guilty to the murder-for-hire charge. According to the most recent available updates on the case, she remains held in custody while she awaits her next court date in late July. If convicted as charged, she could face a lengthy prison sentence, followed by deportation from the United States. Number 7. Roger Allen Holmberg, Sr. Complete chaos broke out during an Alaska Airlines flight from Seattle to Anchorage on July 2nd when an elderly evangelical pastor attacked his wife in a fit of rage because she upgraded to first class without him. According to court documents, 75-year-old Roger Allen Holmberg Sr. left his seat in coach and confronted his spouse. He was accused of verbally attacking his wife, flipping the middle finger at her, and began throwing punches. The victim's seatmate attempted to block the blows, but the victim was struck in the head as horrified onlookers watched the insanity unfold. After hitting his wife, Holmberg went to the restroom. When he emerged, an off-duty police officer who had witnessed the altercation approached him and threatened to handcuff him if there were any more problems. The senior citizen remained on his best behavior for the remainder of the flight and was met by a cop and an FBI agent when the plane touched down in Anchorage. Holmberg and his wife had known each other for about 2 decades, but had only been married for a year and a half when they traveled to Alaska from their home in Virginia. After the attack, the victim reportedly told police that Holmberg had roughed her up in the past, including on one occasion when he broke her finger. She also said that Holmberg knew she suffered from epilepsy and that he could cause her to have a seizure by hitting her in the head. Holmberg's wife had never reported the alleged abuse in the past, but the airplane incident apparently proved to be the last straw. She told law enforcement that she was ready to come forward about the mistreatment. In the meantime, Holmberg told interrogators that he and his wife were trying to fix their marital problems through counseling, but he blamed his wife for their problems while refusing to accept any responsibility for his role in their dysfunction, according to a criminal complaint. He accused his spouse of having anger problems despite his own rage-filled display on the plane. Holmberg was charged with simple assault within the special maritime and territorial jurisdiction of the United States, which could land him in prison for up to a year in the event of a conviction. His case is ongoing. Number 6. Igor Solai. 42-year-old Francesca Deidda vanished from the Italian town of San Speret in Sardinia in May. Shortly after she disappeared, her family and friends received text messages from her phone number stating that she needed some time alone after her relationship with her husband, 43-year-old Igor Solai, broke down. But she refused to speak with anyone on the phone and abruptly quit her job over email, causing her loved ones and colleagues to worry about her safety and well-being. Investigators connected Solai to Deidda's disappearance through evidence they found online, after ruling out the likelihood that she voluntarily went missing. Solai claimed that Deidda wanted some time to herself to reflect, but law enforcement reportedly found evidence that the couple's marriage had recently undergone a rough patch, which only heightened their suspicions of foul play. Deidda's phone and body have not been found, but prosecutors have decided to move forward with a murder charge against Solai, who was arrested in July and remains in custody as he awaits the next step in his case. He maintains his innocence from behind bars, and his lawyer released a statement to the media claiming that there's no evidence of a homicide or of his client's involvement in whatever happened to Deidda. The outcome remains to be seen. Number 5. Richard Jones. A family's lives were turned upside down in an instant in early July when 30-year-old mother of 2 Sophie Evans was found murdered at a home in Carmarthenshire, South Wales. On the same day that her body was discovered, police arrested 49-year-old Richard Jones on suspicion of murder. Authorities have released few details about the circumstances leading up to the homicide and have declined to elaborate on the nature of the relationship between the suspect and the victim beyond stating that they knew each other. They have also made it clear that they are not looking for any additional suspects now that Jones is in custody. According to what little information is available on the case, Jones remains behind bars and the investigation is ongoing. Police have encouraged anyone with information to come forward and share what they know while law enforcement continues to work the case. In the meantime, Evans' devastated family and friends are still trying to grapple with the shattering news of her murder, described by her loved ones as a beautiful and amazing mother. With a huge heart, the young woman is remembered for living her life to the fullest, putting her family and children first, and her kind and caring nature. Number 4. The murder of Patricia Trish McKay. 68-year-old Patricia Trish McKay and her husband, 69-year-old Doug McKay, were visiting Los Angeles from New Zealand in July when a trio of thieves attacked them during a shopping trip at Newport Beach's Fashion Island Mall. In what police described as a robbery gone wrong, one of the suspects tried to wrestle Trish's shopping bags out of her hands, while another suspect held a gun to Doug's head, forced him to the ground and demanded his watch. Doug tried to protect Trish, but the robbers sped off in a Toyota Camry. The confrontation ended with Trish being run over and dragged 65 feet by the suspect's car. She died from her injuries while Doug survived and was treated at a nearby hospital. As the robbery gang fled the scene, one of the suspects fired 3 gunshots into the air, causing a Good Samaritan who was chasing them to stop in their tracks. The thieves escaped, but were apprehended following a 40-mile high-speed chase and are now in custody as they wait to face charges in connection with the case. The crew's alleged leader, 26-year-old Leroy Ernest Joseph McCrary, is accused of being the driver of the car that dragged Trish to her death. He and the other 2 suspects, 18-year-old Malachi Edward Darnell and 18-year-old Jaden Cunningham, are each facing a murder charge along with a felony enhancement of causing the death of a person over the age of 65. If convicted as charged, they could face the death penalty, although there's currently a moratorium on executions in California, leaving the state's death row prisoners with an uncertain future. In addition to the murder charge, McCrary is facing 1 count each of second-degree robbery and evading while driving recklessly. The defendants declined to enter a plea at their initial hearing and are due back in court in early August. Number 3. Joseph Francis. 44-year-old Stephanie Francis was visibly upset and had a forehead injury when police visited the Hopkinson, Rhode Island home that she shared with her husband, 45-year-old Joseph Francis, in May. Officers ended up tasing Joseph, who had been drinking and was described in a police report as aggressive and uncooperative. He eventually calmed down and admitted that he had smashed Stephanie's phone on their garage floor because he was upset with her for meeting men on a dating website that he was also using. Joseph was charged with disorderly conduct, domestic violence, and simple assault, and was banned from contacting or going near Stephanie. He also faced charges for having 2 guns that were equipped with high-capacity magazines, which are illegal in Rhode Island. The judge overseeing the case ordered him to hand over any additional guns he owned, but he failed to do so. A little over a month later, in early July, Joseph fatally shot Stephanie in front of their children and a neighbor. He then fled the scene, prompting the authorities to issue an arrest warrant for homicide and violating Stephanie's order of protection against him. Police spotted Joseph's vehicle in Westerly the following day and tried to pull him over, but he refused, instead leading law enforcement on a high-speed chase that ended when he lost control of his SUV and crashed. He was pronounced dead at the scene. In the wake of the senseless double tragedy, it was revealed that police were aware that Joseph owned several guns, at least one of which he managed to keep, even after his domestic dispute with Stephanie just weeks before her murder. According to the Boston Globe, the Hopkinson Police Department denied his applications for a gun permit in 2020 and 2021 due to his criminal history, but he still got his hands on several firearms. The case has drawn increased attention to the endless and heated debate about gun ownership in America and how to keep firearms out of dangerous hands while avoiding unfair restrictions against responsible owners. Today's topic was requested by Michael Varbel 4392 and Rosa Castellano 4897. If you have any other topics you'd like to learn about, subscribe and let us know in the comments section below. Number 2. Logan Christopher Kelly. A 4th of July street party in Redondo Beach, California went from festive to downright frightening shortly before midnight when a man later identified as 26-year-old Logan Christopher Kelly went on a frenzied stabbing spree, killing 2 people and injuring 3 others. According to prosecutors, Kelly was drunk and high on hallucinogens when he approached a random group of people while they were watching fireworks. He killed 42-year-old Eric Hodges, who was just weeks away from marrying his fiancée, and a 47-year-old William Thomas Collins. He also stabbed 2 35-year-old men and the 68-year-old father of one of the men, who survived their injuries. The attack was stopped thanks to quick-thinking Good Samaritans who tackled and detained Kelly until the police arrived. He was arrested on suspicion of 2 counts of felony murder and 3 felony counts of attempted murder. Kelly was extremely combative against the people who intervened and the cops, leading to additional charges of assault, spitting at a police officer, and using a racial slur. The murder counts carry a special circumstance of multiple murders, which means that Kelly could be eligible for the death penalty if convicted as charged. Authorities have yet to reveal a suspected motive behind the spate of violence, but have made it clear that they do not believe Kelly had any prior connections with the victims. The outcome of the case remains to be seen. Coming up right after number 1, we have more mind-blowing cases in store for you. Stick around for when turning into a demon goes wrong if you haven't seen it yet. Number 1. Tiffany Gray. In early April, 53-year-old Fasil Teklemeriam was found murdered in his Washington, D.C. apartment with head trauma, stab wounds, and a missing right thumb that had recently been severed. By the time law enforcement discovered his body, he had been dead for several days. According to investigators, Teklemeriam was the sugar daddy of a 22-year-old woman named Tiffany Taylor Gray, who was seen coming and going from the residence repeatedly with several people over a several-day period. Surveillance footage showed the group using the victim's key fob to get into the apartment and leaving with various electronics and other items. Police also found evidence that someone had used cleaning products in an attempt to conceal or destroy evidence at the crime scene. Detectives were initially unable to identify the people in the security video. Gray fell under suspicion after they discovered that Teklemeriam had filed a police report against her the year before his death, accusing her of taking his phone and using it to steal $1,800 from a banking app. A witness told law enforcement that Gray cut Teklemeriam's thumb off after killing him and used it to access a banking app and steal his money, which she reportedly spent on liquor, drugs, and Uber rides. 3 months after Teklemeriam's death, she was arrested in Prince George's County, Maryland, on suspicion of first-degree murder and armed felony murder. A 19-year-old suspect named Audrey Denise Miller also stands accused of the same charges. Both women remain in custody as they await their next court hearings. In the fall of 2022, law enforcement in Joaquin, Texas were asked to perform a welfare check at the mobile home of 36-year-old Sarah Hopson. Alan Price and Teresa Louvier had gone into the sheriff's office claiming that a man named Ethan Myers had done something to Hopson. The duo reported that Hopson and Myers, who were believed to have been in a relationship, had spent the night at their residence on Country Road 3635. The following morning, Hopson was gone and Myers was acting strange and appeared to have blood on him. Officers went to Hopson's home and found her body wrapped in a carpet in the middle of her bedroom. She'd been bludgeoned to death as indicated by the large wounds on the side of her head and forehead. Her severed fingers, toes and ears had been placed into a plastic freezer bag and stuffed between her legs. Cleaning supplies were observed inside the room along with paint brushes and paint cans. There was also an odor of fresh paint inside the room. As they waited for the release of an arrest warrant for 26-year-old Myers, the man's mother went to the sheriff's office. She reported that her son had confessed that Hopson wanted him to sacrifice her to Satan and that he'd obeyed her wishes. Myers' mother also told the police that Ethan hears voices and is satanic, adding that he was hiding in the woods to avoid capture. He was eventually taken into custody and a search of his vehicle produced, among other items, a shovel and a rock, the shape of which matched the injuries on Hopson's head. Price and Louvier confirmed that Myers took part in satanic cult activity, but they were arrested as well, with evidence indicating that they'd initially tried to conceal Hopson's murder by painting the room where she was killed. Investigators found traces of fresh paint on Price's pant leg, and a brown Dodge truck registered to Louvier was discovered at the scene of the murder. Myers was indicted by a Shelby County grand jury for first-degree murder on December the 5th of 2022. In February of 2023, Price and Louvier were indicted for murder and tampering with evidence. Number 6. Andrei Gorbatyuk. 27-year-old tattoo artist Tatiana Podvashetskaya was found dead in her apartment in Ukraine's Ternopil Oblast region in the spring of 2019. Her mutilated remains were discovered by the owner of her apartment. The woman had a knife sticking out of her midsection after she'd been stabbed multiple times, and she also had fresh bite marks to her neck. The authorities learned that she'd recently been visited by 26-year-old Andrei Gorbatyuk, a client whom she hadn't seen in several years. The man had become locally known after he'd extensively modified his appearance to look more like a demon with Podvashetskaya's help. Gorbatyuk had magnets implanted under his skin so he could wear horns, and also had a split tongue, vampire fangs, pointed ears, and spikes on the back of his neck. Additionally, Podvashetskaya had tattooed his eyes black. The police believe that on the night of April the 15th, he went to Podvashetskaya's home, presumably under the guise of getting more work done. He at some point attacked the artist with a knife. Blood splatter indicated that the victim, a karate practitioner, had tried to fight him off but was eventually incapacitated after Gorbatyuk had stabbed her several times in the abdomen. It wasn't clear at which point he'd sunk his teeth into her neck. The suspect then went home where he confessed to his mother, "I killed Tatiana Podvashetskaya." The woman subsequently reported him to the authorities. Gorbatyuk changed his clothes, took a few $100s from the house, and then went on the run, but was eventually found in Lviv and taken into custody. Gorbatyuk told investigators that he couldn't remember how Podvashetskaya had been stabbed because he was intoxicated on drugs. When asked if he repented, the suspect reportedly told the police, "Repent is too weak a word for this." During Gorbatyuk's remand hearing, Podvashetskaya's grieving husband, Ruslan Podvashetsky, rushed towards the glass court cage where the accused killer was held. 3 police officers prevented Ruslan from reaching Gorbatyuk, and he was led out of the courtroom in handcuffs. Gorbatyuk was ordered to be detained for 2 months while the investigation continued. Number 5. Edward O'Neill. On January the 15th of 2016, Texas teenager Ryan Roberts was reported missing by his mother, and within days his body was found in a wooded area near his home. He'd been stabbed to death, and the police determined that the main suspect was his friend, 18-year-old Edward O'Neill. They were reported to have been close, and O'Neill had even lived in the victim's home for a few months. O'Neill was described as a devil worshipper, and Roberts' mother later claimed that her son was killed as part of a satanic ritual. Between January the 21st and February the 10th, O'Neill confessed to killing Roberts 3 times, first to a relative, then to law enforcement in a voluntary statement, and again after being read his Miranda rights. O'Neill's satanic beliefs were known to his family, and his father told the media in the aftermath, "Oh, I know that he's worshipping the devil and stuff," but the man denied having had any knowledge of the murder. Following an assessment, O'Neill was determined to have mental health problems in the form of a schizoaffective disorder, thus prevented a trial, and he was placed with the competent authorities. He admitted being a devil worshipper but denied murdering Roberts and blamed another friend. In June of 2020, a felony mental health court judge cut his bail in half from $50,000, and he managed to secure it, thereby leading to his release. Reacting to the decision, crime victims advocate Andy Kahan told the media, "I have never seen a lower bond for first-degree murder than I have in this particular case, and that really flummoxed me." Within months of his release, O'Neill would be accused of murder once more. On November the 28th of 2020, O'Neill allegedly gunned down 39-year-old Derek Mike in the parking lot of a Houston apartment complex. Mike, who was identified as the ex-boyfriend of O'Neill's cousin, had come to collect some of his belongings when he was shot dead. O'Neill had reportedly acted under orders from his cousin. He was consequently jailed without bond. Number 4. Oscar Adrian Solis. In May of 2023, Florida State Attorney Bruce Bartlett announced that his office would be seeking the death penalty for Oscar Adrian Solis, an MS-13 gang member accused of gruesomely murdering Uber Eats driver Randall Cooke. As the case's legal proceedings unfolded, Bartlett told the media that he'd never seen a more gruesome killing, while in reference to Solis, he was quoted as saying, "I cannot focus on how an individual can be so vile." As reported by the Tampa Bay Times, Cooke was delivering food to Solis's address in Holiday on the evening of April the 19th. Solis was caught on CCTV pulling the 59-year-old delivery driver into his home. Without any discernible reason, he then stabbed Cooke nearly 3 times. After killing him, Solis decapitated and further dismembered the body. He was seen dumping the remains with an accomplice, and among the subsequently retrieved body parts was a human foot wearing a black sock. Commenting on the killing, Pasco County Sheriff Chris Noko stated, "You always say the word evil, but this is demonic. Infamous for the cruelty and the propensity towards violence of its members, MS-13 is known to have roots in Satanism, as evident from the tattoos, clothing, gang signs, and nicknames of those affiliated with it. The gang's devil horns hand sign is known as La Garra, a Spanish reference to Satan's claws. Members were quoted as saying they felt that Satan helped them or demanded things from them. Formed in LA in the 1980s by immigrants from El Salvador, MS-13 grew to have tens of thousands of members across the world. The devil-worshipping aspect, accompanied by the gang's extreme brutality, only added to its fearsome reputation. In 2022, El Salvador called a state of emergency after the group murdered 62 victims in a bloody gang war in a single day. In May of 2023, 30-year-old Solis was indicted for first-degree murder and abuse of a dead human body. Seeking the death penalty in his case was justified by the aggravated factors surrounding the killing of Cooke, which included that it had been carried out in an especially heinous, atrocious, or cruel manner. His next court date was set for the midsummer of 2023. Solis had a criminal history that featured multiple instances of violence. Prior to moving to Florida, he spent 4 years in an Indiana prison for assault and burglary, while his rap sheet also included stabbing a fellow inmate. Number 3. Mosa Abid. London teenager Momin Setar was fatally stabbed at his Wembley home on October the 15th of 2016. His younger sisters heard screams coming from his room and then saw a man named Mosa Abid leaving the house while laughing and holding a bloody kitchen knife behind his back. 18-year-old Setar, who was reported as being Abid's cousin and only friend, was found with several deadly stab wounds to the chest. In the killing's aftermath, Abid went to his father's home in Golders Green, where he changed his clothes. The following morning, he was found by local police in Northolt, sitting on a bench next to a church with a knife hidden up his sleeve. he was taken into custody. A search of the man's home in de Havilland Close produced documents which indicated that he'd been interested in the Illuminati and devil worship. Investigators also recovered a rambling letter to Satan in which Abid had expressed his murderous intentions and vowed to follow through on them. The killer, who'd been diagnosed with autism and paranoid schizophrenia, pleaded guilty to manslaughter by reason of diminished responsibility. In June of 2017, he was given an indefinite hospital order. In the years that followed, he escaped from custody twice, causing public safety concerns. The latest incident occurred in April of 2023 when Abid fled while on escorted leave to a newsagent in Uxbridge Road. The police released CCTV footage of the 26-year-old and advised members of the public not to approach him. He was eventually spotted in North Holt on the morning of April the 15th, taken into custody and returned to the hospital. Number 2. Caius Viovis. In September of 2011, the dismembered bodies of 3 men were found buried in Beckett, Massachusetts, roughly 10 days after they'd gone missing. The victims were identified as 44-year-old David Glasser, along with Edward Frampton and Robert Chadwell, aged 58 and 47 respectively. Subsequent investigations would reveal that Glasser was set to testify against Adam Lee Hall, a reported member of the Hells Angels biker gang, in an assault case. The authorities would find that Hall, at the time in his mid-30s, elicited the help of David Chalou and self-proclaimed Satanist Caius Viovis in kidnapping the trio in the early hours of August the 28th of 2011. They were subsequently executed by their abductors, with Glasser being the target, while the other 2 were killed for being witnesses to his murder. Hall, Chalou, and Viovis were tried separately and each denied multiple counts of murder, kidnapping, and witness intimidation. They were each handed 3 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole. Viovis, the last of them to be sentenced, told the court that he'd been offered a plea deal for conspiracy after the fact, which would have seen him given a 7-year sentence. However, the man claimed that he'd rather remain in prison for the rest of his life than admit to something he hadn't done. When his verdict was pronounced in 2014, after 6 days of deliberations, 34-year-old Viovis shouted at the jury, "I'll see you all in hell," before leaving the courtroom. Born Roy Gutfinski Jr., he'd legally changed his name in 2008. Media attention regarding the triple murder had been focused on Viovis because of his appearance, as he had subdermal horn implants, self-mutilation facial scars, spikes in his nose, and the number 666 tattooed on his forehead, but also due to his past crimes. In 1999, Viovis and his teenage girlfriend, Deanne Jones, lured a female teenager to their hotel room where the latter cut her back with a razor blade, inflicting a 7-inch gash. As reported by MassLive.com, Jones and Viovis then licked her blood as they kissed each other. The gruesome assault was discovered after the teenager went to hospital where she needed 30 stitches to mend her wound. During the trial that followed, Viovis claimed he was a Satanist and a bloodthirsty vampire. He and Jones were convicted of elevated aggravated assault and reckless conduct. Number 1. Miguel Alvarez Flores and Diego Hernandez Rivera. On February the 16th of 2017, about a month after she'd been reported missing, the body of teenager Genesis Corneo Alvarado was found in southwest Houston. She'd been fatally shot and then dumped in the middle of the road. Following an investigation, the authorities learned that she'd been one of 3 young, impressionable female teenagers to have been kidnapped by MS-13 gang members Miguel Alvarez Flores, also known as Diabolico, and Diego Hernandez Rivera, who went by the nickname Scary. One of the teens, who'd managed to escape her captors, subsequently gave the police an account of what had happened to Corneo Alvarado. The witness reported that for a month, she and Corneo Alvarado had been forced to take drugs and were repeatedly abused by the 2 gang members. At some point, Corneo Alvarado either criticized or struck a shrine in the home, a statue to a satanic saint to which the gang members referred as the Beast. Alvarez Flores reportedly wanted to give the statue a cigarette as a peace offering, but then claimed that the Beast wanted his soul. Corneo Alvarado was executed with 2 close-range gunshots. After escaping, the witness led the police to the kidnappers and they were arrested. The gang members were illegal immigrants and news of the killing sparked outrage. particularly in the context of then-President Donald Trump recently expressing concerns over criminal immigrants entering the United States illegally. Alvarez Flores and Hernandez Rivera generated further public outcry when they smiled and waved to news cameras during their arraignment. In May of 2021, they were each sentenced to 40 years in prison after pleading guilty to Corneo Alvarado's murder. Hernandez Rivera was given an additional 12 years to run concurrently with his sentence for aggravated assault with a deadly weapon. Thanks for watching. Would you rather spend the rest of 2024 in prison or be forced to vote for the presidential candidate you don't want to support in the upcoming election? Let us know in the comments section below.